good to be here this morning. There's a couple things I'd like to kind of lay as a precursor to this. I think it's important to clear up. So I spent 25 years with the FAA before I resigned in '09. So I'm a recovering federal employee still. Right? But there's a couple things I think are important to say. Well, one is we have to be careful with the tone of our discussion if we get to the point where it's us versus them. 25 years with the FAA, I never met anybody that was against anybody in the U.S. and was intentionally trying to keep small business down. That's not their mantra. Yet understand that the federal guidelines and rule set that the feds have aren't the easiest to work with. And when you have new things you have to come up with, you've got to get outside the box. And getting outside the box for a federal agency is difficult to do. First-hand experience, I was there with that. The other thing is I interviewed, I was asked a couple of questions by a major news network a couple of weeks ago. And they asked me, they said, so what is it? Why are the small UAS commercial guys so hard up against the major manufacturers like Northrop Grumman? In fact, why is it that, because they believe, according to this reporter, they believe that the large corporations are trying to snuff out the small guy. And I've got to tell you, I've been with Northrop Grumman for 2 months now. That's the farthest thing from the truth. The more progress that we see across the community in unmanned aircraft, the better it is for everybody. There's no reason for a corporation like Lockheed Martin or General Atomics or Northrop Grumman or anybody else like that that's building the high-end systems to be against small manufacturers. It doesn't make sense to me. We have a lot of the same kind of hurdles to overcome. I'm going to talk about one of them right now. What Patrick asked me to do was talk about certification. He kind of mentioned it in his opening remarks. I'm going to put something to you just a little bit differently, though, and it impacts you potentially directly. And so, by the way, I am the Director of Airworthiness. I'm an air traffic controller by background. So within my job description as the Director of Airworthiness for Northrop Grumman, that includes manned and unmanned, but it also includes airspace integration. So I spend a lot of time doing all of those things for the company. So I want to talk about a proposal that I think, Patrick and I have been talking for years about what it could be, what it should be. I'm going to put something on the table and maybe recommend we find a way to move forward with it. We'll talk about the rest, how, this one slide, and that's just going to be a verbal discussion. But just so you'll know what the definition of airworthiness, and this is pretty much a textbook definition, an aircraft complies with its approved type design and it's in a safe state of operation. So that's what gets you a certificate at some point, a certificate of airworthiness in the manned aviation community today. Now, is that applicable to small unmanned aircraft? I don't think so. And largely it's because of just the pure difference in the nature of small and large unmanned aircraft. The scales are different. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't get something, but it does mean that you should follow a process. Is there a way to turn the volume back down on this just a little bit, Pat? Because I feel like if I stand too far back, I'll lose them. And can you hear me from back here? All right. I'm just going to back off there. All right. I like to walk when I talk anyways. So I don't believe that we necessarily have to pursue an airworthiness certificate for small unmanned aircraft. In fact, I believe that it's probably more risk-based than it is anything else. One of the challenges in implementing something like this is that a large part of the small UAS community and this business set that you guys are in and that you care about don't have a whole lot of aviation background. And so we're starting from zero from a lot of places. It's a good business case, that kind of thing. But you need to understand you're coming into an aviation community that's really safe, has established practices and processes, and you shouldn't be required to meet the same level of scrutiny and airworthiness and certification, but you should have the same awareness about what it means to be in the aviation system. And awareness doesn't necessarily relate to having pedigrees and standards to some degree. So we'll talk about that. I think it needs to be an operational approval. Well, so then what's that operational approval on? It's on a risk assessment. Aviation systems today are really focused on safety management systems, safety risk management. Anything that you introduce into the aviation system today is going to have an impact on the existing system. You take apart the system from itself, it's going to have an impact potentially on people on the ground, right? And so from that perspective, what are you doing to measure the risk of the introduction of those kinds of things on the existing community? So you can do a risk assessment based on weight. 1 pound, 2 pound, you have a hard time justifying that there's a whole lot of risk in that type of operation, right? What's the operational environment you want to fly in? Is it going to be heavily populated? Are you going to be close to an airport? Those kinds of things. What's your crew expertise? Does the pilot that's flying the aircraft, has he taken at least the flight school? Does he know the basics about the weather environment, the airspace environment that he's operating in, those kinds of things? And then how is the unmanned aircraft made? We talk about frangibility. It's like, well, okay, do I have a lithium battery on board? If it goes through the 767 turbofan, is it going to chew it up, or is it just going to spit it out on the other side? You know, what is it going to fall apart when it lands, when it collides with something? Those kinds of things. So you do your risk assessment based on those kinds of criteria. And then when I ask the how question, it's like, well, okay, so how do you implement something like this? How do I know? And I'll talk a little bit more about the details, but I think you can make it web-based. I think that if you're a small company and you want to find out, okay, I'm 60 miles outside of Dubuque, Iowa, and I want to take pictures here, I've got this kind of aircraft, that you should be able to register your information online. You should be able to take a picture of what it is you want to fly. That's important because flyaway does happen, especially for small aircraft. We need to know who owns that aircraft, right? We should know. You need to provide proof of insurance. You need to agree to comply with operational limitations, so you possibly could roll your mouse over the location on this website where you want to operate, and it's going to give you what the operational limitations are for that. You know, daylight ops, that kind of thing. And you agree to operate with that. And then when you agree to those terms and you have the insurance and everything else, hit the button, it prints you out a certificate, it gives you, again, this is notional, 16-digit kind of insurance form that says, here you go. This goes with that airframe for this operation, right? So in the event 911 has to be called because it ended up going through somebody's window, right? The 16-digit number is on the frame and they can find you, right? And Pat was talking about the liabilities. Liability is a serious issue. For this access and this flying, you need to take it serious, right? So who can do this? Well, the FAA, obviously, I would recommend has the ultimate oversight for this, but I believe that they can delegate this authority. I believe that there are a number of strong organizations within the U.S. that either can be formed or that exist already who could be delegated that authority to do that. They train, they certify the operators, they run the website, they do it all on behalf of the U.S., right? So the contractor could develop a web-based system. And I talk about the tools already a little bit. I combine those in there so you can see where that happens. And I believe that to kind of support this, I think there really could be like a 2-page rule. Keep it simple, right? And I think that something like this could enable that. I don't know that we need a 100-page rule to do this. But having said all that, there still are some hard questions, right, that have to be asked and answered, right? How about being close to airports? Is that a good idea? Well, I understand there's probably a business case, and I know there's some things up close and friendly with the airports that you want to do, but those are highly profile areas. And those are really areas that we kind of need to stay away from, in my opinion, until we get to the point where this kind of operation is routine and it's proven, those kinds of things. What is a risk, and where should the risk limits be? What about the population density? Is there a difference in how you're going to identify, I've got 1,000 people per square mile here, so I can fly over them. I've got 1 million people per square mile over here. I have no business being over these people. You know, is there something like that? Does that depend on, again, the frangibility of my aircraft, what I'm flying, those kinds of things? So I say that, stay away from the airports. But if you have to be inside the terminal area, and this comes into the basic knowledge that you probably need to be able to fly, what the airspace structure is, why the airspace around the terminal areas, around the airport control towers were established the way they were. They generally have to do with the finals, right, the approach finals. I think that we probably should consider starting off with a lower level weight, 2 pounds and under, something like that. And there's no science behind this, right? This is a guess. That's part of the issue. It'd be great if we had some science to base it on. But the good thing about having a rule approved in the federal government is after a rule is finalized, you at least have a benchmark. And if there's something different about the business that you have that doesn't meet that rule, guess what? You can petition to waive it. If you bring the safety case in that says, okay, it's not 2 pounds from our maximum takeoff weight, it's 3 pounds, and I can prove in my safety risk assessment that I am not degrading the safety of the airspace system or putting more people at risk on the ground or in the air by flying this aircraft, great, then bring the petition to the FAA, right? It shouldn't be that hard to do that. What about altitude? It depends. Can you see it, really? I mean, we have this thing, and when I was with the FAA, we approved hundreds of COAs, so I know what that's about. And staying below 400 or 500 feet was good because it kind of, it put a level of safety automatically in there. It doesn't mean the NAS stops at 400. It doesn't stop at 400, right? It's navigable airspace. But can you really see some of these things this big, 400 feet away from you? I don't know that you can. So regardless of whether it's 400 feet or whatever it is, you have to be able to see your airplane, wherever it is, right? That's a visual line of sight. Privacy, this is one of those issues that for small business as well as a big one is still an issue, right? We still have to we have to overcome some cultural barriers still. This is still a work in progress. And what we don't need is a brand new rule that goes out and allows for this business to flourish, but we still have it abused and taken advantage of to the point where it's going to get shut down because it's being used for industrial espionage, it's being used to post videos on YouTube, whatever it is, you know, that you're exceeding what the intent is of the rule. Frequency spectrum. Pat mentioned this earlier from a 228 perspective. That's a limited resource. That's a hard question. I don't have an answer for that, by the way. I don't know if it's 2.3 gig or whatever it is we're doing now, but that's still a hard question to resolve, especially for the low and slow community that might be flying in an EMI environment like cities, those kinds of things that might drag a whole lot of competition for the spectrum in on your aircraft. One of the things that we did test when I was with the FAA about 7 or 8 years ago was the impact in the Miami-Dade area. It turned out one of the biggest squawkers or problems in the Miami area was the transponders on the toll roads. Every time they went out, they squittered over the frequency, and it would cause a problem for whatever was going to fly over there. So there's a lot of competition that's not necessarily aviation related if you're still in that band, right, that's causing the problem. And then I think one of the biggest problems is that last bullet. How do you let people know? So if you come up with a new rule, that's great. You got a new rule, you've got this 2-pager, you got this website set up. How do you educate and tell 200 million people in this country that if you're going to start this, and they don't even know what the Federal Register is, right? A lot of these guys didn't even know that the airspace above their property was regulated. They figured they still owned it. So how do you tell them that there's a new regulation out there? I don't know. How do you do that? Do you do TV commercials? Do you post it on the web? Do you Twitter it? What do you do? I don't know, but that's a hard problem set. And then for the rest of us that are still in the king size role, I mean, we still have Part 21. I mean, just like you guys are waiting for a rule for the small UAS, large manufacturers are as well. We're waiting for some regulatory guidance on the big side. Doesn't stop us. We're still making airplanes for our customers, but they're not the civil market right now. That's a cool airplane, isn't it, really? Come on. Anyway, so I'll take some questions now. I hope I wasn't too much of a wet blanket after Patrick's hoorah speak. I got a few minutes, so if you got any questions for me, hit me with them. Yeah. I didn't bring my Kevlar, but I can still deal with it.
In regards of being a...
Okay, please tell me again. Tell me who you are and where you're from.
Werner von Stein, out of San Francisco. I'm in the imaging business. And thinking outside of the box here now, you actually in the second slide you said about how can we get the information from A to B. What about like a little black box where it would transmit via the cell phone, which is probably the size of a little matchbox, which would transfer, yes, you can fly, you can't fly. It's filed automatic flight plan. If there's an airplane in the area, whatever, there's no, you can't take off then, how? I mean, this is all technology which you can build seriously. It all would be cloud-based, of course. Someone can regulate this. The authorities can pick it up, can actually look for it, and all that kind of things. I'm sure that you guys are thinking about something like that. Very simple, where it's literally menu-driven, where you go to site A, you say, I can visually check it, and then go from there.
Well, and that's what I love about people who are coming into this part of the aviation community who haven't been with the manned community for a while. And I'm just assuming that based on the question, because a lot of this application is cool with the small UAS stuff because it's off the shelf, right? I can fly with my iPad now or my iPhone. You can't imagine doing that with the 777. Right, and so the question is, are there more capabilities out there that you can do things with? Absolutely. So you should have stayed up there.
It's not really the capability. It's actually that it's monitored, because basically if everything is fine, nothing will happen. But if something happens because of a UAV or an aircraft, little tiny piloted, actually flies into a flight path of a dust copter, because all these things are in agriculture. But the thing is, if the pilot would have known there is actually a filed flight path in the system where you set it actually a printout, you wanted to print it out on site. But if it's actually in your iPad or your device, what you have to control it, it would say, hey, hang on a minute here, there is something really happening.
Yeah,
there's a real aircraft coming which has got much more priority. Or even an emergency vehicle.
But not everything, especially in the lower altitudes, is squawking. Not everything in those altitudes is aware of, is participating or cooperating in the airspace system.
Sure.
Right? And so you can't see what's not being projected.
Right.
Right?
Right, correct.
So from that perspective, unless you mandate equipage, if you mandate ADSB or if you mandate a transponder, and you think about now, okay, so I'm going to mandate a black box, I'm going to mandate all this capability, now your costs are, right, now they're ratcheting right on up. Now it might be a safety case where you can go beyond line of sight or do something else that kind of exceeds the visual line of sight capability, but
yeah, but I mean, it's basically technology right now. It's not been there. It costs you an arm and a leg. But if it's out there and basically this is what you have to do and you have to produce them 20, 30, 50 million times, then it comes down to pennies.
Yeah, well, and that's true if you get that kind of customer base where you can sell that many. How many companies are willing to make that investment up front?
Well, basically, they are not doing it right now because it's not really mandated for them to do it.
Yeah, I know.
That's the thing.
No,
so, but
it's a chicken and the egg. There's no regulation,
correct.
There's no mandate, so there's no business going. Yeah, it hasn't stopped a lot of you guys yet, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Doug. Marco Pelchen, Sea Astral. I've been listening to you for many years now, when you were still on the other side. So I'm glad your views are evolving. There's some good ideas there. But what's really interesting in this respect is that we have now countries that have actually successfully implemented, more or less successfully, experimentally implemented small UAS regulations that go far beyond even what you propose now. like Australia, for example, or the Canadian case. You're probably familiar with both. They have different issues there, different kinds of airspace. They have a lot of open space, both countries. So they evolved in that direction. But what we've noticed in several years of operations everywhere around the world is, for example, that also manned aircraft pilots don't read NOTAMs in the morning before they go in the air. They don't. We mitigate that. I mean, we are a manufacturer, but we also train people and so on. So we mitigate that by requiring our teams to have a radio with them. They can call them. They can call non-cooperating aircraft in the area where the NOTAM was issued, for example. And I like the idea of an online system. I don't know how much leverage you still have with the FAA, probably not much now, but these are all very valuable ideas. I hope there's something being done in this direction actually on the FAA level, since there is a mandate, right? I'm happy there is a mandate. I was a bit, it finally happened that there's a congressional mandate for, make things better. But there's one thing that was missing in your presentations, which is a basic sort of level of fail-safe, mandatory fail-safes in the systems, on the software side, on the operational side, on the autonomous side. That's not rocket science anymore, and that, I think, should be mandated, so that if your aircraft sort of, goes and you lose contact with it, that it knows what to do in that case. So these kind of little things. And I don't know about your 2-pound rule. I think it's sort of out of thin air.
Okay. So I appreciate that. I think that the devil's in the details in terms of how you risk or how you measure your safety and you adjust for your safety. If you're going to mandate, let's say, a flight termination system so that you can ensure flyaway doesn't happen, that's a great safety risk mitigator. Does the regulator want to do that? I don't know. It depends. Maybe it works in areas, maybe it's more required in areas where I've got higher population densities, or if I'm close into an airport. Those kinds of things. And I need to be able to guarantee to the regulator that I can stay within my confined area. And the way that I do that is by proving that my automated flight termination system works. Right? Maybe you can come inside the 5-mile veil or whatever that is. But that's going to be a bump up in your cost to operate. But if I'm 100 miles from an airport, and I'm over some fields out in the middle of nowhere, well, then I can argue that my battery life is only 20 minutes anyways on this small thing. So then maybe I don't need to have a flight termination system on board because it's going to die. It's going to land somewhere within this footprint, someplace that doesn't require that. So there are options to pursue for that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, sort of.
I'm not. Jim's here now. I'm not the regulator. But all I'm saying is that I think there are ways to look at skinning this cat.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on the concept of using a little bit of a different criteria, like an operational kinetic energy, for classing these systems, such that you deal with a hybrid system that's half inflated and runs around at 10 miles an hour tops. It's very different than something that launch off the rocket-powered front end of a missile to do a Mach 10 testing. Yeah.
No, I think putting on my airspace integration hat now, right? I think unmanned aircraft, regardless of the size, are kind of challenging the way that we deal with these in the airspace system. So, for instance, there are Scan Eagles or that size class that can get up in the mid-teens, high teens, low 20s in the altitude. And now at 60 knots across the ground, they're kludging up the works because everybody around them is doing 200, 300 knots. And now I've got a guy up in there that is not. And to make it worse, he's not heading off in a straight line. He's doing persistent surveillance, so he's making right-hand turns up there. That's a problem set for integration. So what I'm saying is, again, you can always approach if 2 pounds and under doesn't get it, but you can prove that the kinetic energy of your 4-pound aircraft equals the same as the potential risk of a 2-pound because of the frangibility, fuel, that kind of thing. You can have that discussion. Those are the kinds of discussions you can have, right? But you need to have the baseline set so that you can go in and prove that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be by weight, but weight is a lot easier to translate than necessarily joules and forward motion, that kind of thing.
Hi, my name is Jesse. I'm working on a startup, NorCal Unmanned Aero. And you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation that companies like Lockheed Martin, you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation that you guys are not against small business, you're for small business. And as a startup owner, how can I use a potential equipment vendor such as yourself who stands to profit enormously off of businesses like mine? How can we use your existing resources with the regulations and industry groups to help us along? Can you help sponsor our efforts? Can we utilize your lobbying arm and help move these rules forward? It's going to help us get into business, and it's going to make you guys a ton of money when you finally get your product.
That's a good question. I think to the degree that we're all pursuing the same kind of open doors, I think that makes sense. What we have to be careful about is the nature of the dialogue that's accompanied with that, right? So it's difficult. So I was kind of kidding. I didn't bring my Kevlar, but I feel sorry for Jim. I mean, I had to sit in that seat, and anytime you come here, it's like, oh God, what am I going to face from the crowd? We want to help, right? But you can't approach the hill on one side saying, look, sit down with a Northrop Grumman or with somebody. This is what we want to help you push forward. At the same time, take a rabid dog that's going out of control that I got to keep on a leash, that kind of thing. So those kind of arguments, you got to balance them. I know you're frustrated, but hollering and screaming and doing all these other kinds of things doesn't really get you a whole lot at the end of the day. You really kind of need to work the system. And Patrick, I know, look, Patrick, I've known Patrick for 10 years. You should have seen him 10 years ago, right? He's had his rabies shot. He's a little bit better now, but he's still a little bit energetic.
Well, I have a 14-year history being certified by the FAA for operations and maintenance, so I fully advocate working from within the system. And I agree that it does nobody any good to have a bunch of clowns running around, flying these things and injuring people.
But we need a confluence. We need the voice, right? We need the uproar. So we need the confluence of all of that coming together. I agree with you. All right. Am I out of time?
Yeah, you're kind of out of time.
All right.
One last
Do you have one? All right.
Gotta be quick.
Okay.
Gotta be quick.
Okay, so my name's Hunter. I'm currently developing a department at my company for farming, the application of these drones in farming and agriculture. I'm going to be real quick with my question and then skip everything else. Will agriculture's clarity on regulations be expedited, knowing the fact that agriculture's applications are in lower population areas with limited liability? Permission from property owners is relatively clear and quick, so the line of communication and privacy is very clear, and the economic benefits appear to be more readily available. I think agriculture is one of the sectors that can benefit.
I
from
agree
this
with
very
you.
fast.
I think they're a great place to go do some proof of concept work and a great way to be able to prove the viability, both in the ability of the aircraft to fly, to do what you tell it to, the onboard equipment to be able to do the data gathering, and then the operational environment, whether it's a hazardous one. Yeah, it's great.
I
It's
mean,
a great
do
opportunity.
you think our regulations are going to be expedited and it's going to become a little bit more clear for us?
I don't
Or are we all
know
in
that
the
I would
same
say
boat?
it's expedited. I would just kind of stand up as a community and say, look at us first. We think we're low risk.
relatively
Identify
small.
I don't know.
No one knows us. How many of us are?
Look. Don't look at it from that perspective. Look at it from who your state senators are, right? Who your governors are. You got to look at it from that perspective. Don't look at that. So,
Well, thank you very
All
much.
right.
Thanks.
All right.